Hi, it's Jen Taub. Welcome back to Booked Up, a podcast that features you, me, and our favorite authors. We release a new episode every Sunday morning. Today, I am super excited to be having 3 guests join me for the book club, 2 people you already know and one who's a new face entirely. And we're going to be talking about this book right here by Norman Lear. It's his memoir, and it's called Even This I Get to Experience. It came out around 10 years ago, and we're really just using this book as a vehicle to talk about Norman Lear's incredible legacy as a producer and writer and director and activist for democratic causes. Because we lost him this month. We didn't like lose him. He didn't like go hide somewhere. He actually passed away this month at the ripe young age of 101. And we just want to take a moment to talk about his legacy. Joining me are 2 people you already know, my colleague, Dr. Bridget Baldwin, who's a law professor at Western New England University, as well as the amazing comedian Judy Gold, who was on the show talking about her book. Yes, I can say that when they come for the comedians, we are all in trouble. You can see Judy live during her various stand-up comic shticks. I think there's one coming up in New York and in Philly, also at the City Winery in both cities, January 12th and 13th. So check that out on her website, judygold.com. We also have a new, as I mentioned, a new face here, someone who actually worked with Norman Lear. His name is David Kusnet, Kusnet, not Kush. I made that mistake, and it was really hard to communicate with him by email. He's an incredible person who started out his career working in the labor union organizing effort at AFS-CME, and later went on to be a speechwriter. He was one of Norman Lear's actually first hires at the organization People for the American Way in the 1980s, where he was head in the leadership in terms of the communications division of People for the American Way. After that, he joined the Clinton White House, where he was President Bill Clinton's chief speechwriter. I am so glad you're here to talk about someone whose work has always inspired me as a kid who watched TV in the 1970s and as someone who admired the good work that Norman Lear has done, for democratic causes and for expanding our notion of what it means to be an American, to be inclusive and supportive of everyone. It's my pleasure to talk with these friends about his work and his book. Okay, let's dive in. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Nice to see you all.
Hi, Jen, cousin.
So it's nice to see you, and it's actually nice that for people who are listening, they could actually hop over to YouTube and see the people that I'm talking with, which is really awesome, and the different setups that they have. I'm seeing some smiley faces, some bewildered faces, and then like Judy acting like the Queen of Sheba with like a bigger fucking microphone than the host has. So we'll have to talk about that later. I'm
sure they're
honey.
The same size. I'm not a size queen.
I am.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
very competitive. Very competitive.
It runs in the family, Jen. It runs in the family.
We'll have to duke it out on Commercial Street in Provincetown.
Yeah.
All in the family. David?
You got to get with the program.
David.
Okay.
Oh, David's a speechwriter. Okay. So I want to introduce you all since you haven't actually met. The guy who chimed in with the best line of the day so far is David Kusnet, not with an H. It's Kusnet. And he actually knows Norman Lear, you guys. So I don't know if any of you have met him, but David has and worked with him for many years at People for the American Way. And he also was the speechwriter for Bill Clinton and Michael Dukakis and blah, blah, blah. I could just I could make him blush, right? But we'll wait for that. We also have my brilliant colleague who actually has a PhD, Dr. Bridget Baldwin. I say actually because, law professors and lawyers are JDs, which is Juris Doctors, not doctorates. It's a Juris Doctor. So I am a doctor, but she's really one of the doctors on our faculty. She's brilliant. She also collects Lego, and she is incredibly smart. And she's going to come talk to us. Also, she's like Gen X with the rest of us, so she really grew up on these sitcoms.
I did.
But also, as a Black woman, has something to say about the representation of Black families on the various spinoffs. And Judy, who I've been harassing only because she's family and she intimidates me. She knows this because she's funny. Judy Gold is the amazing stand-up comedian, author, mom extraordinaire, super tall, who also stole things from her mother when she was a child. And I'm not going to let her live that down.
Okay. Once. Or a couple times.
It was money.
I know, but I tried to put it back.
I mean, you actually probably really related to these families. So I just want to thank you for doing the book club. It's really nice to have different people come together, having all read the same book. And as you know, we're actually using Norman Lear's book that he wrote 10 years ago. Even this I get to experience. We're using that really as an excuse to talk about Norman Lear's work and his legacy, because he just passed this month, December of 2023. So Judy, what did Uncle Norman do for your career?
I have to say, I've done 3 one-person shows, and the second one I did was called The Judy Show, My Life as a Sitcom. And it was about my addiction to sitcoms growing up and how I thought, I will eventually be honest. I was undoubtedly going to be starring in my own sitcom. Never happened. But Norman Lear not only made my childhood so much richer than it would have been. He really was the zeitgeist most of the time when I was growing up. And the fact that my family, I mean, look, we can all say we all watched these shows at the same time and then talked about them the following day. The discourse that he facilitated in this country, the issues that he nailed on the head, his fearlessness, his unwavering representation of everybody, which I'm sure Bridget can speak to much better than I can. The fact that I saw this woman, Maude, and thought, I could be on television. This feminist, this tall, sarcastic, loudmouth feminist. The fact that
Are you talking about yourself again?
Yes.
No, sorry.
But
Beatrice Arthur.
He made us smarter. He made us confront things. I mean, All in the Family came on right after the Smothers Brothers were canceled for being too political and putting Pete Seeger on. But what I find fascinating about the book is he spends a lot of time in his early life, which is also, I think, you can see where he develops a sense of humor, but I think a lot of kids who would have had that experience would be depressed. He really dealt with a lot of shit growing up, but the characters that had surrounded him and his his love of his horrible father, he made Archie Bunker likable. When I think of my childhood, I think of being a part of those families. That we were so invested in them that they could talk about pretty much anything because we already liked them. We already knew them. And he changed the face of everything. And he was on the right side of history. And I don't want to take up all this time, but I have such a profound appreciation and love for Norman Lear. I think the world would be a completely different place without him.
So that's one side of it. And I agree. Our lives were transformed and we talked about him at school or some people at work. I know we lost Bridget on camera, but maybe I have her voice.
I
Are
see
you there,
her.
Bridget? Oh, Bridget?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Well, I'm going to,
I can hear
I can
you.
hear you. So that's great. Beautiful.
Okay.
So, Bridget, Judy sort of talked about Norman Lear being transformative, taking on tough topics, and we can, topics included, abortion and rape and interracial marriage and all these different things, and that a lot. I think reading this book for me, I now know that so much of it came from his childhood. I had no idea that his father spent. I mean, this is the beginning of the book, like no spoilers. But his father spent 3 years in prison because he's a ganef, Yiddish for thief. He was like a crook, and he never kind of learned his lesson, and he always had one or another thing he was reaching for. And so on the one hand, you have got like this kind of self-centered, it was mean to the mother, this kind of not a great father, but someone he absolutely looked up to, and took some of his like fearlessness into the world. Maybe that's why he took the chances he did. But unlike his father, who struck out time and time and time again, almost everything Lear touched turned to gold. So Bridget, what was your experience as a kid? What was your experience? We're capturing both sides of it, don't worry. What is your experience as a kid watching these shows, and now as an adult and an academic, being able to reflect back on what he did with his work?
For me, I guess when these shows came out, I was like 2, 4, 6. So I was a young kid. And so I was, watching them alongside of my family. I think really my opinion about these shows are more reflective as an adult, and not necessarily as an academic adult, but more so just as an adult in general. I think he was very instrumental in introducing a number of Black individuals to arts and film and sitcoms and television and movies and things like that. I think he was the first to take a chance on introducing the Black family life to the extent that he could, right? Because we had, culturally, a white writers writing about a Black life that they did not live, nor did they observe, really. And so that was, very instrumental and pivotal, at least in its connection to a lot of the Black community. But it does come with a lot of controversy, right? It comes with a lot of controversies. We have 3 big major shows, the Jefferson being the longest show, sitcom running for him. But we still, have this stereotype of this, this family, even though they've moved on up, right? We also have the first Black family, intact family, created through the Good Times show. But then somehow we have buffoonery with the high school character, the oldest male, and then it does end up being a single parent family home, and then a no parent family home, and then of course we get Sanford and Son. Oh, and then I also want to remark about Good Times, the fact that it was filmed in Cabrini Green. And I don't know if you all know about Cabrini Green, but Cabrini Green is one of the notorious, most violent project housing in Chicago. I'm from the Midwest, so very much knew about Cabrini Green. And then Sanford and Son, right? The problematic. And those are just the highlights of things that we see watching the shows, right? There's a number of things behind the scenes, like pay equity and stereotyping and how we vision these people and what we ascribe to be. I think I didn't know, unless I was good friends with Elaine Brown, and I'm not sure if she mentioned this in her autobiography or if I just learned about it in his autobiography about the Panthers coming and telling him, hey, we need better representation. But those were behind the scene things. And I think, as lauded as he can be for the things that he did contribute to, it doesn't come without controversy. It doesn't come without, a lot of critique with regard to representation of the Black family and the Black community.
Can I follow up on, on some of that? Because I think, looking through the eyes of people in 2023, these shows look very different, right? And hearing from him, listening to this book on Audible, all like 19 hours of it, yeah, you sort of see this way that you almost think he's setting us up for explaining that he pushed as hard as he could, because you always see he gives these examples of when he refuses to back down with standards and practices and things like that. So he sets this thing up, and it's probably true that he doesn't like to give in to other people about his scripts, right? And so to me, what I wanted to ask about Bridget was the controversy that arose with the character Jimmy Walker was playing. What was the name of the character on the show? Good time. JJ, that makes sense. JJ, who also said
James Jr.
JJ Walker.
James Jr.
JJ, and his dynamite, which I'm not going to try to replicate. It was his signature, but the way that his co-stars thought he was kind of stealing the show a little bit, but more importantly, they didn't think it was dignified the way he was, the representation. I thought it was really interesting the way Norman Lear talks about it in his book, and yet I felt unsatisfied with where he landed. You have actually met him in real life, right? So you sent me a picture. Can you talk about both your reflection on that in the book, and how in the world do you know all these famous people?
Well, I think that what a lot of people don't get from that book, well, they get the perspective of Norman Lear, right? They don't get Esther Roll. They don't get, the other perspectives. And I think that the show, when Esther Roll was offered the show, right, I believe she was a part of the Maude. I think it was a spinoff of the Maude show. I might be incorrect. But
she was the maid. Wasn't she Maude's maid?
She was offered this show. And one of the things that was a part of the negotiation was how the show would be. It would be a representation of an intact family, because originally they were going to do it, I believe, as her being a single parent, and she refused to do that. She said, no, if you're going to do this show with me, I need a husband, and I need, we need to be an intact family to show that Black families do exist. And so the show started off that way, but when JJ originally did his Dynamite, right, it got such an attraction from the audience. And we, at the end of the day, right, this is a consumer-based thing, right? It's here to make money. That's the bottom line. It's not here to portray Black people in this talented or great light. It's here to make money. And so they, the producers started to see that was something that could generate, the sponsorship and all of that. But what it started to do was it started to take away from this notion that Black people can deal with controversies, and that they weren't just, entertainers, and that they weren't buffoons, and right, because JJ was the oldest child. I think Michael, the youngest son, was trying to be a lawyer, and the daughter, I think, was trying to be a neurosurgeon. And he was an older child, not working, and going around saying Dynamite. And most of the script, if you see later on some of the seasons, most of the script started to center around things that he was going through that was kind of like, funny, not really serious, not tackling anything. And so it kind of portrayed this family in a way that Black people didn't identify with. That's not how we identify. And so I think the cultural differences, like I said before, you had white writers writing about Black culture, which they didn't live or experience in any kind of way. It was, the stereotypes, the prejudice, or whatever that was going on. And I think that created the problem, was that the direction of the show started to change. But if you notice, I think even though Norman Lear said, I'm not going to give up my script, the show went down. And they realized towards the end of the season, I think it might have lasted, 5 or 6 seasons. Toward the end of the seasons, they brought Esther Roll back, but it was too late. But they saw that what they wanted to do didn't in fact work. And they started to lose, the consumerism and all of the things that they wanted by doing it that way. So that's...
Before I turn to David, I want to ask you about a show he doesn't talk a lot about, which I loved when I was a kid. And again, I guess I must be I'm probably 10 years older than you, so I was at the right age to like watch these shows all the time. I
Same.
loved What's Happening.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Loved it. I had the biggest crush on who was the cute kid? Dwayne.
Dwayne.
I had the biggest crush on Dwayne, and I loved it because I felt like I could relate to those kids hanging out in the, what was it, like a diner, and there was enough, I felt like, diverse personalities there. But did you ever watch that show, Bridget?
I did. What's Happening? I watched it quite a bit. I enjoyed that show. Everybody loved Dee, right? The little girl. She always had the little quippy sayings and the smart mouth and things like that. So it was a good sitcom. I mean, whether it was a reflection of reality and culturally, probably not, right? I mean, in culturally, in my culture, I would probably got backhanded a couple of times if I said the things that Dee tried to say out loud to adults. But I truly enjoyed that show as well.
Can I just add something to what
David.
Bridget said?
Oh, go ahead, Judy. Yeah.
It's just so fascinating to hear Bridget's take because, you know, for me, Dynamite, I mean, we were all saying it. It was like, where's the beef? It was constant. And I know JJ from the comedy clubs, you know, and I still look at him. And I, you know, I know he's really close with Ann Coulter and it just like annoys me, but some of his politics, but that for me was just everything to say. Dynamite. And you know, you take it from your perspective. He's a clown. You know, he is a clown. And I just, you know, as a kid, I guess I was probably, you know, junior high school. I completely drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
It's also, but you also are, you know, if you think about it, Judy, you are a comic.
Yeah, like I'm a clown. So,
and you recognize, I mean, no, but it's interesting, right? And it's all about, I like the different perspectives. So David, you watched the shows probably, but you knew a different side of Norman when he was going on to yet another phase of his life. Do you want to, and you read the book a while ago, so do you want to, you can jump in whatever way you want, because I'm curious about how you reflect on what we've already talked about and what you knew about Norman.
I dealt with the political side of Norman Lear, not the entertainment side, although I think part of his genius was to realize that politics is entertainment, and to be one of the first people on the progressive side of the fence who understood that. And as it happened, I came to People for the American Way after having worked, spent about 3 or 4 months as a speechwriter on Walter Mondale's campaign plan, and as students of political history. Now we carried Minnesota, but we did not carry the other 49 states.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do a spit take there. But
and before that,
it wasn't because of your writing, David. It had nothing to do with that. Don't worry.
And before that, I'd been on the road for 7 years as what they called a PR organizer for AFSCME, the Public Employee Union, organizing leaflets and dealing with crisis situations. So I had worked with many of the same.
So that's AFSCME, right?
AFSCME. If you want, unrelated, but if you want to watch something really funny, go on YouTube and look for their parody of the AFSCME TV spot from 1979. It's something. The parody is something Norman Lear might have written. Just a lot of
what is it? ASM?
A lot of down to earth obscenity talking about.
No, AFSCME.
CME. Yeah,
it's one of the umbrella. Yeah.
And so I had spent about 7 years working with and bringing the union message to a lot of the kinds of people whom Norman Lear presented in his sitcoms, were regular working Americans from different backgrounds. And then I worked for 4 months in the campaign that wanted to appeal to those folks, but did not succeed. And I think sort of my exposure to Norman Lear on a very small scale was sort of, I think, how the Democratic Party and the progressive side of the spectrum looked to him in the 80s, that here after we had gotten clobbered by Ronald Reagan, who came out of Hollywood and understood that politics is entertainment and symbolism, here was someone in Norman Lear who had succeeded in entertainment, who also came out of Hollywood, and who did, whatever the accuracy of the representation, did shows about working people from every background that the working people themselves wanted to watch. There clearly was an audience for Archie Bunker. There was an audience for the Jeffersons. There was an audience for One Day at a Time and Mary Hartman. So a lot of people were ready to take a lead from Norman Lear on how to communicate to the American people. And in large measure, that's what People for the American Way was about. As he liked to say, it was the only public interest organization that began as a TV spot. Back in, I think, 1980, when it was clear that Reagan was going to sweep the country and move the country backwards, and when there were a lot of what were then called the televangelists, Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, Jimmy Swaggart, a lot of TV preachers who were preaching as if the Republican Party platform was the 11th commandment in the Bible. And Norman Lear had a character very much like, not like Archie Bunker, but actually like very much like his father. You know, someone who had seen a lot of hard times, an actor playing someone like that, going on TV and saying that he was a religious man, but he didn't think that the Bible told him what to do in politics. And having preachers tell people what to do in politics and present it as God's will was wrong. And he concluded by saying, that's not the American way. And that was before the internet and before a lot of things. But there was an 800 number and a post office box. And lo and behold, about 100,000 people got back in touch and said they wanted to be part of this.
What?
So Norman Lear knew how to meet consumer demand. And he said, these people want an organization. I'm going to give it to them. And he called it People for the American Way. And then he sort of set up an organization to meet what was the demand from the response to that TV spot.
So what was, David, can you talk a bit about in the early years and was it just trying to amplify the way that messages, or was it funding candidates, or what was the action that People for the American Way took, using, I'm assuming, membership fees and so on, or did he fund it himself?
Well, it did. I think, thinking aloud, I think it, back in the 1980s, I think it did two things. The first thing was just to advocate for some concept of the American way that was inclusive rather than exclusive, that you didn't have to march in lockstep with Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, or even with President Reagan in order to be a good American. And Norman Lear had a special credential for saying this because he was a World War II veteran. He was a successful business person. He was somebody who, were it not for his politics and maybe were it not for his religious background, he was a secular Jew, the right wing, not the right wing, but mainstream conservatives would say this is a good guy. And so he did a lot of TV spots like that original TV spot, just advocating for values of democracy and individual freedom and inclusiveness. And he tried to engage as many spokespeople as he could across the spectrum. So he not only had progressives like Barbara Jordan and Paul Newman and others on the progressive side of the fence speaking out for what he was doing, he also enlisted Barry Goldwater, who was very conservative on economics, but was a libertarian on personal freedom. And he had enlisted people, religious leaders across the religious and political spectrum. And he tried to get as broad as possible a definition of what the American way was. And then we also took on causes, and they weren't partisan causes. They didn't have a D or an R after them. The first cause that we took on was textbook censorship. And at that time, Texas ordered all their textbooks statewide, which states like New York and California did not do. So Texas was the largest single market that textbook publishers had to appeal to. And the right wing, led by a couple, if I remember right, named Mel and Norma Gabler, they were sort of the moms and dads for liberty of their era.
Of that day.
They just organized campaigns against any textbook that included evolution, against any textbook that included any kind of critical view of American history or probably of the Confederacy. And they were sort of previewing what Ron DeSantis and the so-called Moms for Liberty are doing now. And they had a stranglehold over Texas, and Texas had a stranglehold over the textbook market. So we had a spotlight on that, and we organized in Texas to get some opposition to it. And we were able to have some success in getting other states, not to just follow Texas in textbook adoption, and in even getting some controversy going in Texas. That was our first cause. And from there, we went into a look at textbook censorship around the country, focusing in particular on evolution, which was very controversial back then.
So, David, can I ask, I mean, given the progress that you saw, and eventually after one term, Reagan's successor, George H.W. Bush, is out, Clinton gets in, you're a speechwriter, you think the country's maybe moving in a better direction. I'm not saying that Clinton did everything right. I've got some issues around deregulation of banks, and also there are other issues, obviously, but how can you, as you're talking right now, I feel like this vice squeezing my heart, because we're back to where we were before, if not worse. So, I mean, what the heck is People for Worse? What is, all these organizations, People for the American Way, there are all these groups. What's going on now that we have this kind of racism and censorship and anti-Semitism and sort of hate? I mean, I want you to solve it right now and tell me how we fix it.
Well, if I could just do a shout out to People for the American Way as it exists now, which is very different, and I think has evolved in a very good way from what we were doing in the 1980s. Back in the 1980s, we were largely a media-oriented organization, which is understandable since Norman Lear founded it and played quite a role in its leadership and direction. Now it's much more of a community organizing group. They have what they call the Young Elected Officials program, and if you go on their website, you will just see that it's meeting the needs of today, including, I think, having a much more diverse leadership and staff and program than was true of People for back in the 1980s.
That's good.
It's a very good. I think it's going in a very good direction. One thing Norman Lear did not believe in was staleness. He used to say the most important word in the English language was next. And he would not have wanted People for to be repeating what it was doing in the 1980s, and year after year do the same thing in the same TV spot and so on. So it's evolved.
I love that. Can I just add a footnote? I love when he said also about retail, when he was trying to sell tchotchkes, he was like, the cardinal rule is don't mark up a knockoff.
That's right.
That's sort of like next, too.
No, I mean, today's People for is not a knockoff of the People for in the 1980s. And rather than try to speak for them, I just urge you to go on their website and see what they're up to.
Awesome.
I think if I could just say one other thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I think that I think we do miss the Norman Lear of the 1970s and 80s because his Archie Bunker, as much of a comical caricature as he was, I think it was a prophecy of the Donald Trump movement. I mean, it's not. I mean, not that Archie Bunker was from blue collar Queens. Donald Trump is from a gated community in Queens, but he's masquerading as if he's Archie Bunker. And clearly, there's, as Norman Lear understood back in the 70s and 80s, there's a constituency out there of people who, as I think Norman said about Trump when he first was running, people who just see Trump as the middle finger that they're giving to society.
Since you're mentioning, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know. It was something that he had in his biography that would make me think that he would cringe at the idea that we think that his Archie Bunker is a Trump. He said something which I totally disagree with, but he said that, Archie was not a bigot and that Archie was just scared of change and fear about the economy and things like that. And I don't know if I think that Norman Lear would agree that Archie Bunker was the Trump. I think he would, I don't know, I think he would disagree with that, even though I disagree. I think Archie Bunker was a bigot.
I think
I want to say that I think I'm gonna let you talk in a second. One second. I just want to say one thing, David, to Bridget, which is I didn't think Archie Bunker was funny as much as he was shining a light on sort of people like him. I mean, I guess he was humorous because he got the laughs, but with a live audience. But I remember when I was in college, one of my professors called him, or maybe they'd read an article and they're repeating this phrase, but they called him Archie Debunker, because through his bigotry and through his language, he was exposing us to the stuff that we didn't want to talk about. But like, I can agree that he's I think the problem is because he was likable, people can find anything that gets represented likable as hateful as it is. And that's why I think people can like Trump, because they want to believe he was the guy on The Apprentice, even though I found that
Trump
character
is not likable.
Hateful.
Trump is not likable. I think Archie had this caustic, he was caustic, and there was a little bit of vulnerability about him. And the fact that he was surrounded by people who challenged him made him like, all right, whatever, like there was a sort of surrender sometimes. It's not like he didn't let people of color or Jews or gays in his house. It was like, all right, just get away from it. It was this, it was less dangerous.
Well, he was beleaguered, right? He was represented as this beleaguered person, and it would be the last gasp of this kind of, I need my armchair.
Out of touch.
He'd hop to it.
He was
but
out
the
of touch.
problem is it wasn't.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the last gasp.
Right. And look what we have now. Trump is not likable, and he is just...
People like him, Judy. Even Mary,
they don't like him.
His niece says people like him.
No.
His
niece says it?
Let David, you can get a word in edgewise, I promise. Go ahead.
I think Bridget's referring to a very important passage in Norman's book, which I reread it before the show, and where he's talking about that that Archie Bunker was a bigot, but there were other factors involved in his view of the world, including just, him being a guy who's just looking at a changing world and wondering if it's leaving him behind and leaving him out. I don't think Archie Bunker is Trump. I think Trump presents himself as Archie Bunker and appeals and wants to appeal to the contemporary version of Archie Bunker. And I think Archie Bunker at his best in terms of politics could be a stand-in for, I think, a relatively small but important part of the Trump constituency, and there are such people, which is people who vote, who, depending on how old they are, they would have voted for Bill Clinton they would have voted for Ronald Reagan in the 80s, for Bill Clinton in the 90s, probably for George W. Bush, probably for Obama, and then voted for Trump in 2016, might have voted for him in 2020. It's not the majority of the Trump constituency.
So is it the sexism? Is it the sexism, or is it he was giving voice to the stuff they were saying in their living rooms?
I think one of many things that Norman Lear understood is that the divisions were a very divided society by race, class, culture, politics, religion, just about everything. But that the divisions in our society aren't only between people, but within people. And,
that's true.
I mean, if you have someone who voted for Obama and then voted for Trump, this is someone who's at war with themselves in some ways, and I think he understood that
either that or they're sexist because they didn't want a woman to be the president. Right. That's the other
maybe
thing.
They voted for, maybe if they're in Michigan, they voted for Gretchen Whitmer. I imagine you can find people who voted for Trump and for Gretchen Whitmer. Maybe, maybe if they're in Queens,
let's also add
Kathy Hochul,
the most qualified man or woman ever to run for president. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So, guys, we could yes. I mean, I think let's pivot from Donald Trump for a moment and circle back to.
Wait, can I just say that?
No.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, you can.
No, I agree with everything David's saying and everything Bridget says. It's just that.
What am I, chop liver?
I don't like you, but it is. Donald Trump is dangerous. I don't think Archie Bunker was dangerous because of who he was surrounded by, and that
Or,
it was a
and he didn't have
character.
power, though. Archie Bunker didn't have
Right.
power.
Right.
If Archie Bunker had power, he would be dangerous,
Yeah.
right? And that's what makes Trump dangerous, because he has power and a constituency. Oh,
And no one likes him, Jen.
Okay. I don't like him, of course, but his niece said that he is charismatic in person, and Mary is the last person on the planet who likes him. So I'm just saying that.
I
Judy.
am friends with Mary, and
I know you are.
She never said that to me. Okay, go ahead. No.
Okay, fine.
I get it.
Okay,
I think
fine.
they like. I don't think they like him as it's like, hey, Donald, I'm really upset. I'm not. No one's calling him for help, or they're they want a friend.
You know what he is, Judy? He's a clown. He's like dynamite, right?
Yeah.
Trump presents himself. He's a showman and a narcissist,
Well, it's
and
like
people
what David
want to
said
watch
about
him.
Reagan, except he went up. Trump doubled down on that.
And Reagan didn't stay in office after he was had dementia, whereas Donald did, and continues to try to get back to the White House. But that's another story. So I want to try to make one circle around one more time and see, what other topics about the things that I guess struck you as, shocking or surprising or something new in the book. And I'm going to do this in reverse order. I'm going to start with you, David. And then do Bridget, and then do Judy. So David, I know that you read it a while ago, but was there anything
he said he reread
looking at it now? I know he reread it. Judy, I was fucking listening.
Whatever. Cause
unbelievable. Go ahead, David. Without an H.
When I read the book, having worked with him and having thought I knew him, I was struck, as I think was said earlier, by just the darkness in his life. That here the man I met was a very a phenomenally successful and influential man, and here he is writing about his life, and it's not only the story of someone coming from an immigrant or blue collar background and making it in America, but it's a story of just the complete darkness in his early family life. His father going to prison several times. Norman clearly had a very difficult time with his mother. And, since we're talking about, single parent or zero parent families, there was a point where his father was in prison. His mother had run away, was not relating to the rest of the family. And some uncle comes and visits him. And Norman is 9 years old. And the uncle tells him, Norman, you're the man of the house now. So this is how he grew up.
But come on, but it becomes funny. But the thing is, as you're saying this, I have a smile on my face because that was the funniest thing in the world. Because that was the moment he realized adults were complete assholes. Like saying
you or I don't have to be the most empathetic people in the world to realize that it probably wasn't funny in the moment. And that that Norman's life in large measure,
right,
and that a house needs a man.
Some humor in things that must have been horrible in the moment.
That's what I was thinking, Judy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's got to be a man. Doesn't matter how old they are, as long as there's a man in the house. Yeah.
So Bridget, actually before I turn from David, but David, I didn't. What was he like as a manager or like one-on-one? Like, what was he like as a human being that you dealt with one-on-one?
If you were told that you were going to meet somebody who, I don't know, I think unlike Donald Trump, he was honest about what his net worth was. Someone who was worth probably hundreds of millions of dollars, could get presidents on the phone, had was as influential as any individual might have been in television. You'd imagine somebody who'd be very, very full of themselves, very impatient with other people, who wouldn't listen, who would just talk and not listen.
I'm like that now, and I don't have that influence.
He was the opposite of that. He was courteous. He listened. He was respectful. He remembered what you had said the last time, and he also had a wicked sense of humor. And I'll just tell one story on myself in terms of my relationship with him. There was a book party for him when the book came out, and there was a receiving line of people with their books. And going to him for the signature. And everyone first looked in the index, but there was no index to see if they were in the book. And then they looked in the acknowledgments, and he's very generous, and he acknowledged just about everyone he had ever met in his life. So there I go to like page 4 out of 5 pages of acknowledgments, and there I am in 12-point type. And I go up to him, and I figure that, you know, he was about 95 years old or something, that he might not remember me. So I introduce myself, and he says, David, I was just thinking about you this afternoon, but at my age, I can get away with saying I can't remember what I was thinking.
That's so sweet.
But he had like a joke.
That's very funny.
He had a joke without cruelty for every occasion.
It's very sweet. So, Bridget, what jumped out at you in the book?
I think there was a lot of things that jumped out at me in the book. One of the things is that towards the end of the book, I had forgotten that he had a sister. So that was one thing that shocked me, that he didn't talk a lot about her in the book. And then he talks about how I didn't talk a lot about her. And I'm going to tell you a little bit. I'm not going to talk about a lot about her now either. And, you know, and so that shocked me, that he didn't talk a lot about her. But then also some of his connections to the Black community also shocked me, because I didn't, you know, like that Maya Angelou.
Like Alex Haley,
Maya Angelou, Harry Bell, all of these, you know, things that, you know, you don't get from seeing what he's produced or being involved or looking at his political path. You don't get that like you get the intimacy in reading or hearing in my case. In all fairness, Judy, she gave me like 3 days to read the book.
I know. I had, and then she told me in the email we were doing this tomorrow. So I was like planning on finishing the book tonight, and no. And then I had to listen to it. I had to do the Audible because I couldn't.
Do you want me to give you? I can connect you by text.
Yes,
and you can just bitch me out when I'm not here.
Bridget.
Thanks.
I love Bridget.
We're coming to see you in New York, Judy.
Yes.
Bridget's always like, you do fun things. Can I be your +1? So now, Judy, we're showing up together.
But I'm going to be in, is Beverly, Massachusetts by you?
Isn't that east?
I don't know.
Beverly, is that east?
Okay, road trip. Okay. Bridget, road trip. We'll take the Justice bus. Can we do that? We probably can't. Our law school has a Center for Social Justice, and we do these kiosks places for people can come to get legal help. But we have a moving kiosk. It's like a van, you're only supposed to use it if you're actually doing legal work, not going to see an obnoxious comedian.
Yeah.
But
why am I can obnoxious? You're definitely a member of my family, because these terms are okay.
Okay, Judy, I shouldn't have given you like the final word. Yeah, it's yours.
Well, I kind of I'm with David. What really struck me was there were 2 stories that really struck me. The one with when he was selling little trinkets outside the baseball game, and then he sees his uncle with his son going to, he knowing that he had wanted to really go see a baseball game, but he would sell these things outside the game so he could be near the game. And then he sees his uncle with his son and he hides. And then there was
his son being his cousin.
Yes, his cousin. Words. And, even though the uncle knew.
Wasn't he with a friend too? Wasn't it his cousin and a friend?
Yeah, he was with a bunch of, And I got so upset at that. And then what was the other one? There was one other one where I just wanted to go hug that little boy. The fact that he did not, the parents shipped, the mother and the sister lived one place and he lived another place. And the way he wrote about, so matter-of-factly about, I was stuck there. I had to go live with this one. I didn't see my father. And, and yet I could feel this just agony for this, little boy. And then there was one where do you remember the story where one of his friends, the father, would say something to the kid like, every day, like, get up, stand up tall or something like that.
And he wished he would say it to him, but the
right.
boy
And he was like,
yeah.
I just wished his friend's father would say it to him. And he sees the friends later on as they're adults and says, when your father used to say that to you, I wished, I had a father who said that to me. And the kid said, that was the most, I hated that more than anything. And it was just, the fact that he just adored this man who was so flawed, and this family that really didn't pay attention to him. I just, it's just there's such a little boy in all of this, and a fearless little boy because he has nothing to lose.
I think this reminds me as we close, if you have your book in front of you, Judy, I think you're the person who could, it's on page 3 where he tells his mother, and he's a story he's told over and over again. He tells Norman Lear tells his mother, gets her on the phone and says that that the Television Academy was starting his Hall of Fame. And he was going to be inducted to it.
I thought it was my mother. I thought it was my mother. Yeah.
Well, we all did. Yeah. He's been inducted into it. And he's saying, all these incredible people are going to be, that first inductees would be like Edward R. Murrow and Lucille Ball and all these people. And he goes, and me. And I'm going to read the description. You're going to be the mother. My mother didn't miss a beat.
Listen, if that's what they want to do, who am I to say?
Oh, it's perfect.
I mean, it's so, and seeking that approval. I mean, it's.
But it's also the Jewishism, like
his
you recognize
grandmother
that.
saying, "Go no," that he was going to be giving this speech at Harvard, and she said, "Go."
What does that mean? What does go no? I had to look that up. What does go no mean?
Go no. Go, no, go, know everything. Go. Like she's giving him like the
thumbs
you're
up.
Free. Go tell everyone everything Not, you don't have to stay here with me and visit me. Go, no. I love that.
The grandmother I loved how much he loved his grandmother. There aren't that many women that he seems to respect, which is a whole other story. But his grandmother,
his wives, you didn't think that?
Yes,
his wives.
I he respect his wives because he wrote so eloquently about them, and even you're like, okay, no, I don't think that.
No, you're right. I think his first wife. I think he made a mistake. He was sort of in the thrill of the moment.
No
being
one's ever
overseas
done
and married
that.
her.
No one's ever done that.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. No, you're right. He did care for them, and even yes, you're right. He just had a lot of them. But yes.
And David. Well, we don't need you, Jen.
Okay, fine. Okay, he was great. He was a fabulous husband. He just didn't know himself that well.
But he was a good provider.
I identify with.
Remember, he was a good provider.
Yes, he was a good provider.
Exactly.
Love Bridget.
That's exactly what I was going to point out.
Yeah.
That's it. Bridget, you picked out, I think, the 2 sentences or paragraphs in the book that I would pick out if I had to pick out sentences or paragraphs. Just amplify it a little. He just makes the point that in the 1950s, the best thing that could be said about a grown man was that he was a good provider.
Yeah.
I mean, and it meant a lot to him because his father sure wasn't. But he did provide him with, I think, something in him that made him, I know we're wrapping up, but like the stories in this book, you just have to read about like how he gets Frank Sinatra to, pay attention to him. I mean, this guy had hustle before hustle existed. I've read a lot of Hollywood memoirs. That's right. But his father somehow didn't really land on his feet.
He got the good part of it. And also the fact that he could even be in a successful relationship and have kids after you read his childhood is pretty amazing.
True. Yeah. Okay, fine.
All right.
Fine. Okay.
Bridget, when are you coming over?
That's fine.
All right.
On my way.
Well, thank you guys.
All right.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate this sort of last minute request. And it's been real. You can be on the book club anytime.
Thank you. I'll go be obnoxious now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was amazing. I only wish that I had gotten an opportunity to meet Norman Lear in person. during his lifetime. It was really nice to see him through the eyes of three different people: David Cusnett, who worked with him at People for the American Way; Bridget Baldwin, who as a young kid, what did she say when she was 2 or 3 or 4, watching him, and even as an adult looking back at the groundbreaking work he did to introduce the American public on television, to Black families on sitcoms, as well as the complexity of what he got right, what he got wrong, and where we need to go with that. And of course, my friend and cousin, Judy Gold, who brought her perspective of what it was like to watch those television shows as a comedian and look up to the actors that were being, given those opportunities by Norman Lear on his shows, and just the comic impact of his work. So thank you always for being with us here on Booked Up. I'll be back again next week, where we always talk about the writing process, the written word, the lives that authors lead, and the subject matter for their nonfiction works. It's great to hear from you. I love to get mail at my P.O. Box, Booked Up, P.O. Box 147, Northampton, Massachusetts, 01061. I also love to get email at bookedup@politicon.com. Thanks so much always. We appreciate our listeners. We appreciate your recommendations for books to talk about, guests to have on the show, and just being part of this conversation. Remember, it's really helpful to us if you like what you hear to hop over to either Apple Podcasts or to Spotify. Write us a review, give us 5 stars. It really will help other people find the show. And that's it for now. See you next week.